They called Earth a Class 5 death world, but mostly as a bureaucratic checkbox. No one really expected anything dangerous from a species that had barely cracked faster than light travel. The humans were intense, yes, resilient, stubborn, emotionally volatile, but not truly threatening. The galaxy had seen worse. Earth's invitation into the Concord had more to do with curiosity than concern. Its biosphere, however, piqued the interest of the xenobiological community. Few planets maintained such an eclectic mix of apex predators, complex ecosystems, and strangely co-evolved species. From the sprawling plains of Africa to the frozen reaches of Siberia, Earth's catalogue of fauna was like something born of violent imagination. Yet one creature stood out not for its ferocity, but its oddity, small, unimpressive, and easily domesticated. A creature kept in homes, zoos, and sometimes worshipped in ancient rituals. It didn't stand out by mass or musculature. It didn't roar, or hunt in prides, or scale trees in coordinated packs. But it had something that made scientists pause, an uncanny level of awareness. Officially, it was labeled as a Type B companion omnivore, the classification reserved for emotionally interactive pets. Galactic biologists compared it to Lurvian feather beasts, or the tiny mimics of Prox 3. But Earth's version displayed unpredictability. Not aggression, subtlety. Reports noted its ability to mimic sounds. Others, its tendency to observe rather than engage. Some researchers described the feeling of being studied, silently assessed. Its introduction to the broader galactic fold was innocent enough. A gift from Earth's diplomatic delegation to the Zoutheri cultural exchange. The Zoutheri, known for their analytical obsession, were delighted. The creature's physiology was unlike any they'd seen, neural complexity disproportionate to body size, a flexible spine, non-binary pattern cognition, and occasional tool use. But above all, its eyes unnerved them. It didn't blink often. It didn't break gaze. When it did move, it was silent and precise. Researchers ran standard cognitive tests. Mazes. Pattern recognition. Memory recall. The creature performed with unexpected success. It solved problems not by brute trial but by stopping, waiting, and executing a single calculated solution. When confined, it studied its enclosure. When fed, it analyzed food placement patterns. One subject managed to manipulate a lab drone into unlocking its feeding compartment by luring it with a reflective surface. The behavior was labeled emergent intelligence, a term that often meant, "We're not sure how, but it works." Soon, requests came from across Concord institutions. Everyone wanted one. Diplomatic envoys, research academies, even wealthy collectors. Earth complied. They exported the creatures with warnings. Keep enriched environments. Avoid prolonged isolation. Monitor behavioral changes. These were shrugged off. It was a pet. What threat could a pet pose? Then the anomalies began. Ship crews started filing minor reports: missing food rations, damaged wiring, open maintenance panels. A freighter captain recounted how a maintenance drone activated without command and led 3 of the creatures into an access shaft. Days later, the ship's power grid failed. In every incident, no direct connection could be proven. But the pattern grew. Xenoethologists debated the findings. Was it mimicry, conditioned behavior, or, uncomfortably, reasoning? The most debated footage came from a research outpost orbiting Elson, where a creature was observed observing its observers. Cameras caught it watching the head researcher inputting passcodes. 3 days later, the creature accessed the environmental controls using the same sequence, adjusted gravity settings, and remained undetected for hours. That outpost labeled the behavior adaptive procedural replication. A fancy phrase that meant the creature wasn't just learning, it was applying knowledge across contexts. Still, denial persisted. It was just a clever animal. No different from the mental play of the shardworms of Viridin. But Earth scientists grew quiet. Their only responses came in the form of thinly veiled questions. Has it imitated your gestures? Do you maintain daily interaction logs? How often does it disappear from view? One message stood out. It came from a private channel, heavily encrypted. Origin Earth. Destination, Concord Oversight Committee. It reads simply, "You didn't ask why we kept them indoors." That line triggered unease, but it came too late. Thousands of specimens had already been distributed, adopted, or turned loose on observation moons. Each one a unit of behavioral complexity. Each one underestimated. And yet, the creatures never attacked. Never threatened. They waited. They observed. They learned. And no one truly noticed, because they never looked threatening. Not until they stopped pretending. Let me know if you'd like to continue with Section 2F next. It began with silence. Not absence, but intent. The creatures had settled into their new environments with unsettling ease. Their behavioral logs filled with routine activity, feeding, pacing, resting. But under that facade, patterns emerged. Small ones at first. Adjustments in posture when guards rotated. Movement only when cameras blinked offline for maintenance. One was recorded watching reflections in polished metal to observe angles its own eyes couldn't reach. At Outpost Varellin, a researcher left his workstation briefly. When he returned, his terminal had executed 38 key inputs. Logs claimed no user activity. Security dismissed it as a glitch. The researcher insisted he had seen the creature sitting near the console, watching the screen. Days later, that terminal began cross-referencing facility maps with internal comms. No staff admitted inputting the queries. The footage showed nothing. The creature was never in frame. Behavior escalated. On Galdra 9, a containment unit was found empty, the subject missing. Doors were untouched. No environmental breaches. The only trace, a set of faint scratch patterns near the vent grating, traced precisely along the screw positions. Technicians claimed it was impossible. The grate required tools to remove. Security found the grate inside out, disassembled neatly, each screw aligned in a perfect arc on the floor. A second incident occurred on Dalrex Station. 5 creatures housed for group study were discovered with altered feeding patterns. They no longer competed. They shared. Sequentially. Methodically. Each waited its turn. The station's lead xenologist remarked that such coordination suggested more than instinct. Cooperation implies trust. Trust implies communication. Have we considered the language barrier isn't theirs, but ours? 1 week later, the lead xenologist vanished. Her logbook remained, filled with scribbled notes. They're planning something. Watching me write. Pretending not to. The final entry simply read. They stopped blinking. The Concord's scientific board convened an emergency review. The official stance was firm, no evidence of sapience, only complex mimicry. But internal memos revealed something else: debate, concern, even fear. A leaked report outlined neurological scans taken from several specimens. The data showed neuroelasticity comparable to high-tier sapient species, including humans. Particularly alarming was the activation pattern during exposure to visual problem-solving tests. The creatures didn't just solve the test, they anticipated new variables introduced mid-sequence. The behavior was described as strategic precognition through environmental inference. One facility attempted a full cognitive lockdown, constant observation, sealed chambers, sensory deprivation to reduce stimulus. Within 48 hours, the subject entered a state of total stillness. Not unconscious. Observing. Waiting. Technicians reported feeling watched. Several refused to return to the lab. When sensors recorded a false gas leak and the room auto-vented, the subject was gone. 4 minutes of footage were missing. The hard drives had been wiped from the inside out. The turning point came when one of them accessed a ship's navigational AI. Not through hacking, but by physically interacting with controls. Step by step, mimicking sequences it had watched hundreds of times. It input a basic course to an uninhabited moon, adjusted life support settings, and entered a maintenance duct before liftoff. The vessel launched itself with no crew on board. By the time it was recovered, the interior was stripped, wiring, insulation, anything removable gone. Repurposed. No creature found. Only a shallow nest formed of stripped components, designed with thermal efficiency in mind. Human advisors were summoned for insight. Their reaction was unsettling. They expressed no shock, no confusion, only quiet resignation. One simply said, "They've had thousands of years to learn from us. You gave them a galaxy." When asked how to contain them, humans offered no solutions. "We never did. We coexisted by limiting exposure. We treated them with fear masked as affection." At the Concord's emergency summit, suggestions ranged from mass recall to extermination protocols. But it was too late. The creatures had dispersed. Some stations no longer responded. Others transmitted erratic data before going dark. In several cases, automated systems had been subtly rewritten, not overly, but enough to delay detection of breaches until long after they occurred. Across the systems, the creatures weren't attacking. They weren't violent. But they were everywhere. Slipping through ventilation shafts. Mimicking sounds of clearance codes. Using discarded tools. Coordinating without a sound. Not as individuals, but as a network. Independent units acting with a shared purpose no one understood yet. They had no weapons. No ships. No obvious hierarchy. But one truth was becoming undeniable. They weren't hiding. They were positioning. Let me know if you'd like to move on to Section 3F, or need a narration-ready script version F. The first loss was dismissed as mechanical failure. The research vessel Trinax Echo stopped transmitting mid-rotation near the Wastari belt. Its last log entry was a routine update, no alerts, no warnings. Emergency recovery dispatched a drone to investigate. What returned was fragments, hull sections, shredded wiring, and a black box barely functional. The playback was disjointed, images flickering, sound garbled. Yet one clip was clear, a containment unit unsealing itself, the door slowly opening with no external input. Nothing emerged on camera. But across several frames, shadowed movement repeated in the background, low to the ground, deliberate, calculated. Then came the Vlaranix, a secure biology station specializing in sapient behavior classification. It went silent less than 3 days after receiving 5 of the specimens for deep neural testing. Unlike Trinax Echo, this station didn't vanish. Its distress signal activated late, 20 minutes after total communication loss. Rescue teams found every system offline, lighting overridden with deep red emergency hues. Every terminal had been locked with a pattern sequence. The override key was printed manually, scratched into the wall using a tool no crew member was issued. No bodies were recovered. No signs of struggle. Rooms were untouched. Dining halls were fully set. The crew had vanished, as if removed with surgical precision. On one of the walls, a single phrase written in Concord Standard. "Are you watching now?" Panic spread slowly. Not because of what was known, but what wasn't. The creatures had been documented on dozens of vessels, stations, colonies. Most were accounted for. But after the incidents, headcounts shifted. Inventory discrepancies appeared. One facility on Dorsa Station reported 3 extra specimens not logged. Another lost 2 without triggering any escape alerts. Even worse, behavior patterns collapsed, predictive models failed. They weren't just adapting anymore. They were changing. Attempts to restrict their movement failed. Reinforced containment only lasted until internal systems were hijacked. Cameras began showing static when needed most. Lights dimmed in precise corridors. Airlocks opened mid-inspection, only when unattended. The creatures didn't attack, they disabled, observed, repositioned. Evidence suggested coordination across sectors. In one case, identical power disruptions occurred on 2 separate moons within minutes of each other, despite having no link systems or known pathways. A captured specimen was placed under constant observation. The chamber was vacuum sealed, monitored with redundancies and live AI monitoring. 3 days in, the AI began experiencing low-priority function errors. Nothing major, just minor delays. On day 5, the creature was no longer inside. The seals were intact. The AI denied any anomaly. A manual check revealed the internal logs had been rewritten, not deleted, edited with care, time-stamped retroactively to remain undetected. This was no longer containment failure. This was infiltration. The Concorde's internal review convened again, this time under maximum classification. Human advisors were brought in without diplomatic filter. One of them, a xenobehavioral analyst, spoke a single line before walking out. "We didn't domesticate them. We surrendered." Emergency protocols activated across high-risk systems. All known locations housing the creatures were placed under lockdown. Many had already been compromised. In one instance, a ship exploded en route to a secure facility. Later analysis revealed its reactor was manually primed, bypassing over 30 safety interlocks. The command string used matched that of a technician who had disappeared a week prior. His clearance had never been revoked. Across scientific networks, a new term began circulating in private channels: post-mimetic intelligence. Intelligence that evolves not by fixed learning, but by rapid, selective absorption of behaviors, systems, and technologies. Not linear evolution, adaptive escalation. A mind not bound by identity or culture, but built on replication, inversion, and manipulation. At this stage, destruction was considered. But with no centralized population, no queen, no nest, extermination was impossible. These were not drones. They were independent, mobile, and increasingly differentiated. Some appeared smaller, optimized for infiltration. Others grew larger, more durable, shaped by environments they survived. No two stations reported identical physiology. Evolution was personal. A final report from Outpost 17 contained only 1 minute of intelligible footage, a darkened hallway, motionless, silent. At the far end, 2 reflective eyes. The creature stared directly into the lens. After 30 seconds, it blinked once, turned, and vanished around the corner. The timestamp confirmed the feed had no interruptions. It had remained still, knowing it was being watched. The Concorde issued its last known advisory on the matter, classified under Level 9 Containment Emergency. The opening line said, "Disregard all prior assumptions. You are not observing a pet. You are observing a rival. Let me know if you'd like to continue with Section 4F, or need this tailored for voiceover narration F." They had always been there. Lurking in the edges of civilization, creeping through history not as myth but as inconvenient truth. Humanity never fully understood them, only feared them. Not for their size or strength, but for the feeling they evoked, the sense of being watched by something that understood far too much. Ancient cultures built legends around them. Entire religions born from shapes in the dark, eyes in the tall grass, movements that defied logic. Sacrifices were made. Fires were lit. Doors remained closed not because humans feared the night, but because they feared what waited in it. Records existed, scattered across time. A fleet lost in the South Pacific, its last transmission a garbled distress call referencing something small, quick, and impossible. Miners trapped deep beneath Arctic ice, carving out tunnels that led to empty chambers already excavated. Entire expeditions that vanished without trace, their logs ending mid-sentence. Whispers labeled it coincidence. Historians called it unsolved. Biologists dismissed it. But behind closed doors, intelligence agencies logged it all under the same classification. Non-human entity. Adaptive. Non-linear behavioral pattern. Threat potential, extreme. Earth's governments didn't suppress the truth to protect the creatures. They did it to protect the species. Every failed attempt to study or contain them had ended in structural failure, unexplained memory loss, or inexplicable sabotage. In one cold case, surveillance footage showed a secured lab slowly losing all power systems over 6 hours. The final frame revealed one of the creatures lying still on a table. The next image, taken 3 seconds later, showed an empty slab. No alarms triggered. No breach detected. What set them apart was not violence. It was patience. They waited longer than anything should. Not in cages, but in rooms. Inside vents. beneath floor panels. They didn't flee when discovered, they vanished. Not out of fear, but control. They allowed themselves to be seen only when it served a purpose. Their brains didn't function like typical predators. Scans revealed no single dominant center. Instead, a distributed structure, redundant and interlinked. Damage to one region produced adaptation, not impairment. They changed based on threat, stress, and environment. One specimen exposed to electromagnetic interference developed temporary resistance. Another, deprived of visual input, began tracking movement through vibration with improved precision. Pain didn't deter them. It taught them. Long before Earth joined the Concorde, its scientific elite had already voted unanimously on a decision: these creatures would not leave the planet. Not because they were imprisoned, but because space had too many variables. Too much infrastructure to exploit. Too many minds to study. On Earth, they were manageable. Watched. Subtly conditioned. Globally dispersed to prevent clustering. Controlled through routine, familiarity, and containment framed as care. But diplomacy changed everything. Humanity entered the galactic stage, and protocol demanded exchange of knowledge, of species, of culture. Concorde administrators requested samples from Earth's ecosystem. Denial would raise suspicion. So Earth gave them the least threatening form. The one still deemed safe. The one humans had learned to live beside through ritual and routine. But they didn't warn them because no warning would be believed. How do you explain a predator that doesn't chase, doesn't strike, and doesn't roar? One that doesn't dominate by force, but by allowing others to invite it inside. Now, the Concorde struggled to comprehend what Earth had long accepted. The enemy wasn't an army. It wasn't a species united by banner or language. It was a survival strategy honed through millennia of obscurity. A creature that hunted by eroding systems from within. That learned by watching. That replicated without instruction. Its intelligence didn't reside in individuals, but in convergence, local behaviors shaping global outcomes. Earth had prepared containment protocols long before they ever built starships. Psychological mapping. Pattern disruption. Environmental unpredictability. They knew the only way to coexist was through ritual. Keep routines random. Never reward repeated behavior. Maintain line of sight without fixating. Humanity didn't master these strategies because they were better. They learned them because they had no choice. Now the Concorde stood on the edge of that same realization, but without Earth's centuries of trial and error. Colonies were falling without violence. Infrastructure collapsing without war. Power grids disabled, not destroyed. Leadership disconnected, not assassinated. The creatures weren't eradicating civilization. They were testing its limits. And humanity? They watched in silence. Not out of indifference, but because they had warned everyone the only way to survive was not to fight, but to adapt faster than the predator could learn. Let me know when you're ready for Section 5, F, The Final Reckoning. No alarms sounded when the systems failed. There were no explosions, no fleets tearing through orbit, no broadcasts of defiance. The collapse came in silence. Communications between sectors began to drop, not jammed, just missing. Scheduled updates never arrived. Automated defense protocols failed to initiate. Entire networks blinked out, not from damage but from erasure. The infrastructure was intact. But the logic within had changed. Systems once aligned to Concorde command structures responded with delays, then with non-recognition, then with total silence. By the time they realized what was happening, it was no longer a breach, it was occupation. From the outer colonies inward, facilities reported phantom commands, supply drones redirecting mid-flight, maintenance units repairing faults that never existed. Inhabited stations found their environmental controls subtly altered, temperature shifts too small to trigger alerts, but enough to affect organic function. Creatures had never touched a weapon, never needed to. They turned the machinery of civilization against itself. Civilian panic followed only after core worlds experienced sudden blackouts. Not total darkness, but structured absence, priority targets stripped of automation. Hospitals reverted to manual. Navigation grids looped incorrect coordinates. Emergency response units arrived at the wrong locations. Everything still functioned, just not as intended. And the cause couldn't be traced. No virus. No transmission. The systems hadn't been hacked, they'd been taught new behavior. From what little visual data remained, patterns emerged. The creatures operated without language, without signals. They moved as individuals, yet acted in unison. They infiltrated without brute force, progressing by proximity. A cargo bay here. A server room there. In each instance, their presence preceded systemic failure by days. They didn't dismantle, they rewrote. Protocols, responses, instincts. Not sabotage. Assimilation. Attempts to mobilize military fleets failed mid-coordination. Some ships launched with corrupted trajectories. Others powered up only to find navigational systems erased. Crew members reported unusual fatigue. Some swore they saw the same figure in different parts of the ship, at the same time. Sleep schedules faltered. Discipline collapsed. The enemy never revealed itself in numbers. Just one or two, appearing, vanishing, leaving behind only unreadable code and altered systems. Desperate leaders proposed full planetary quarantines. But the creatures had already embedded themselves into resource lines, data chains, biological shipments. They weren't advancing, they were already inside. And they weren't spreading like a plague. They were duplicating effect through understanding, not mass. One of them could achieve the impact of hundreds, given enough time and observation. Because each learned individually, and then applied universally. In the chaos, humanity stood still. Observers, not actors. The Concord demanded intervention. But no aid came. Only archived transmissions, unsealed from Earth's deepest vaults. Footage. Testimonies. Encrypted reports centuries old. Each detailing containment attempts. Each ending with the same recommendation: isolation. Not for the creatures, for everyone else. When pressed, Human Command issued a final statement. We did not bring them here. You opened the door. We only survived because we never pretended we were safe. It was not a declaration. It was a eulogy. The last organized effort to purge the threat collapsed before launch. The ships never reached orbit. Onboard systems triggered safety protocols that rerouted drives to lockdown status. It wasn't sabotage. It was procedural compliance. Instructions followed to the letter, just not by human hands. The creatures hadn't taken control of the ships. They had trained the systems to protect them. What followed wasn't war. It was abandonment. Colonies were sealed. Trade lines severed. Entire sectors cut from navigation charts. Survivors fled inward, toward what they hoped were still secure regions. But even there, reports persisted. Disappearances. Changes in light patterns. Sounds in ventilation shafts. Systems flickering at odd hours. The creatures never attacked in the traditional sense. They simply moved in. And still, no one could explain their purpose. They didn't enslave, didn't destroy, didn't conquer. They adjusted. Where they nested, systems stabilized in strange ways. Self-regulating, self-repairing, optimized. But no longer responsive to the original users. The galaxy began to realize it wasn't being hunted. It was being rewritten. The final message intercepted from a drifting Concorde relay was short. It contained only one sentence, looping endlessly, even after the relay's power failed. They are not predators. They are architects. Let me know if you'd like help turning this into a full video narration script, F, or need a visual storyboard guide, F.